just say that I'm going to, I'll just do a quick run over, a quick resume, and then we'll do a meditation again, just to sort of cover the ground that we've already covered and bring it together before we move on to the next aspect. So we're looking at the 5 principles of our system of practice. And I mean, one of the great things about the system of practice that Sangaharakshita devised, well, originally as a system of meditation, but we've extended it into all areas of practice, really. A great thing about it is that it is principial. It's based on principles, and these principles are very, very broad. You can relate these principles to more traditional terminology. I mean, for instance, integration is largely the area of what's traditionally shamatha, or calming the mind. Positive emotion also largely comes into shamatha, although none of these are just shamatha practices. They all extend into insight. And then spiritual death and spiritual rebirth are 2 aspects of vipassana, or insight. And receptivity, or just sitting, well, that's always just sitting. It's always just that, or simply being, as I'd sometimes express it. So it does have relation to these traditional formulations, but at the same time, these principles enable us to explore in many different ways. So we've got the basic practices, which we've all learned in each of those areas. I mean, some of you who aren't order members won't have gone on to learning sadhana as such, but one big aspect of sadhana, of visualization, mantra recitation, well, we do that in pujas. We recite mantras. Let's say we have Buddhas and Bodhisattvas on the shrine. You can visualize them as well. And, quite an important aspect of that is shraddha, or, confidence, trust in the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So, it's just like, well, that is just one aspect of sadhana. Another point of view is that this whole thing is sadhana. I mean, all these 5 principles, if we imagine them as a mandala, they are sadhana, because sadhana actually means practice. And these 5 areas embody all of the main areas of practice that you'll find in traditional Indian or Indo-Tibetan tantric sadhanas. So, the whole thing that we're doing now is a sadhana, but not in the sense of a visualization and mantra recitation with regard to a Buddha or Bodhisattva. So we're working with these principles in a particular way. The approach is mainly somatic, mainly body-based, based in the direct experience of the body as, you could say, a field of energy, or a field of sensation, if you like. We're going into that. And the first aspect, integration, is simply becoming embodied and reaching the point which I've been calling basic presence, which equals access. So access, I like to avoid the word concentration because I think it gives the wrong impression, but access, upachara samadhi, is the point at which we are just basically present. And when you are basically present, then you can start to engage more thoroughly, of course, because the hindrances are in abeyance. They're not there at that time. So that's our immediate objective with integration, to become somatically embodied and reach a state where the hindrances have gone into the background at the very least, or conceptual thinking has died down somewhat. Then positive emotion. Here, where we've been taking a quite honed down approach to it, in the sense that we've been focusing on the heart and just getting into the qualities of the heart, which is an aspect of the soma. And then from there, opening to metta in whatever way we can. And then just seeing if we can, so to speak, open even further, or almost drop out of the picture and allow unconditional love to so to speak, flow through us. Just discover that unconditional love is already here. Yeah. So those two are integrated. And then thirdly, yesterday we started looking at some aspects of spiritual death. And we again did this in a somatic way. We were looking really, the basic premise is that we have a sense of separation or dividedness. I am divided from everything else. It's the fundamental self-view. I am separate. I exist separately. I am some kind of substantial entity in here somewhere. So we were investigating that in terms of looking for somatic boundaries. We did bring in sounds towards the end, and indeed sights. I'm not quite sure how people got on with that because we didn't quite have time to go into it. But maybe if you did have any observations, you could bring it out this morning. A bit later on when we'll do this sit, and then we'll have an opportunity for any questions or observations, and then I'll sort of move us into the next area. So that's the basic outline. Okay, so let's set up and do a meditation, about 20 minutes, just sort of covering those areas. Again, you're getting back into the zone with the soma, the heart, and looking for boundaries. So just set up your usual posture, however you find it comfortable. And as we've been doing, and as Sangaharakshita recommended, just start by just sitting. And the just sitting enables us just to get a sense of what's going on with mind and body. Now, whatever degree of mental activity is going on, we're simply going to withdraw awareness from it by bringing awareness into the immediate tactile experience, the sensate experience of the body. And we've been starting with the face and bringing awareness down either gradually or relatively quickly to the sensations of contact with the seating arrangements, whatever we're sitting on. So just do that. Bring awareness, first of all, into the face sensations, and then bringing awareness down smoothly down the body until you reach the base, the grounding of the posture. And when the awareness is in those sensations of the base, the grounding, just let the awareness be in those sensations. Notice their nature, notice whether they feel vibrant or frozen, solid or spacious. see whether you can sense or even get an imaginative sense of the earth beneath us, the earth more in terms of its vibrational, energetic nature, its gravitational nature, rather than the geological aspect. And then to bring more alignment into the posture, you could use the method of breathing up from the earth below, letting the in-breath bring the prana or chi up from the earth, right up the core of the body, towards the back of the body, towards the spine, right up through the neck to the top of the head, even opening beyond the top of the head. So just doing a few breaths that way, if you find it helpful. And just notice what effect it has. Does it have an effect? The other more familiar method, which also is imaginative, is imagining a kind of thread attached to the very top of your head, just gently tugging you upwards, tugging the head gently upwards. So you can try that as well, just to see what brings more sense of alignment into the body. And subtly checking for balance, centering. So is there a sense of leaning even slightly in one direction or another? Just adjust back and forth until you find the point where it feels most poised. And then just let the awareness kind of sweep through your whole body and get a sense of wherever there are holdings or contractions which can be let go. So we're simply sitting in an alert and relaxed way, aware of the whole breathing body, the whole somatic cloud of sensations. So at this point, you can use the sense of the breath as a subtle anchor to awareness, just to allow hindrances to disappear further, allowing for greater embodiment. If you wish for more of a particular place, I recommend the lower abdomen, the hara, Just let the awareness rest there, breathing into the hara. And be aware of the whatever qualities you can detect in that area of your body. And now let the awareness come to the heart center, the center of the chest, more or less. Or if it's not clear where it is, drop in a question. Where is the heart center? And see if it reveals itself. And again, just as with the hara, you can have a sense of the breath coming into the heart center. Probably the breath sensations are more evident, clear in that area. So just being aware of how it is, what felt senses there are in the heart area. And don't forget to also include awareness of the area to the rear of the heart, or even seemingly just behind it. And does bringing awareness there have any particular effect? And then just open out to or cultivate contact, metta, kindness, goodwill, benevolence, well-wishing, keeping the awareness in the heart. It's like awareness has taken up residence in the heart, as distinct from the head. Now, can you drop out of the sense of me cultivating metta and just allow unconditional love to be here, surrendering to the unconditional love which is already here, has always been here, letting it flow through or express through us. So there's still presence in the soma, presence in the heart space, and presence in the metta. So just open, expand awareness to be all that. And then, as we were doing yesterday, check for a sense of inner space. Again, referring back to the cloud metaphor. And then, can you detect any boundaries between the inner space, somatic space, and space outside. Can you find any boundaries to this cloud of sensations? So just look or feel into that. And then just let go of looking and sit as you are. So at this point, don't do any further looking or feeling into. Just, if you feel boundaried, just be boundaried, feel boundaried. If you don't, feel unbounded. But the love is still here. If it's unconditional, it never goes away. And the soma, the whole cloud of sensations, is still here. So we're not doing anything, we're just, as at the beginning, aware of how it is. And then when you're ready, opening your eyes and shifting if you want to. Okay, so before we move on, any comments or questions or observations? We didn't quite have time to possibly go into all the comments after the exercises yesterday. So, if anything's occurred to you overnight, or you want to bring some perspective to it, now's the time. And don't forget to unmute yourself if you want to speak.
Can I say something?
Hi.
Oh, it happened to me yesterday as well, where there's that, once you let go of the mind thinking that there's a boundary between I was lying down just then, And like, even though my mind knows there's a boundary between me and the bed, when I let go of that thinking mind, it was like I felt like a cloud, where
Mm.
there was more just awareness around that
Mm.
contact.
Oh.
But I couldn't really tell where my body started and where the bed was. It was just like a load of sensation. It was
Mm.
really nice.
Mm. Yeah, great. Yeah, so that's kind of what I'm getting at. It's just sort of letting go of the usual constructs we put upon those sensations and noticing the sensations for what they are. And you do get a sense of, in a way, being free floating, which can be very relaxing, particularly if you're lying down. Any others? Okay, well, there'll be opportunity later. Or was Naravira about to say something?
I was about to say something. So I was it's about awareness as metta.
Mm.
So sometimes doing metta bhavana, not contacting that's what I'd normally describe as sort of free flowing sort of sense of love. Maybe my energy feels a little bit more locked or something. But for instance, with the first stage, focusing on oneself, if I focus on parts of my experience that are, for instance, unpleasant or uncomfortable, and just be with those parts of my experience.
Yeah.
That seems to me like metta. So I'm not, because there's an aspect for me of metta that's just to do with a being with and a kind of willing to be intimate with difficulty, for instance. I mean, it doesn't just have to be difficulty. And there's a kind of holding, it's a sort of phrase from psychotherapy, but that's the idea, sort of being present with something, and you're just sort of holding that part of experience. And that seems to me like the operation of metta. So I just wondered if you had any comments.
Yeah, I mean, I completely concur with that. It's like the metta is simply, I mean, basically, we often kind of think of love in terms of is a willingness to be with another person. And if you're just with another person, in many ways, it doesn't need anything else. It's just the willingness to be with. Now, you could say, well, awareness is with all experience. It's completely intimate with all experience. Yeah, so it's a kind of exquisite sensitivity, which simply allows whatever emerges to emerge and lets it be and lets it go.
Yeah.
So that is happening all the time. You could say that's at a very that's at a very subtle level. Yeah. So when we're cultivating metta, we're approaching that. When we're cultivating any quality, in terms of our these 5 principles overall, we're approaching something which we can discover ultimately is our very nature, which has been covered up. I will be going into coverings up shortly, but so that is love. That is love in the unconditional sense. There's another thing which I think is worth saying about love is that, or metta, and compassion. Everything we're doing in terms of Dharma practice is an expression of compassion. I mean, the whole basis of the Dharma, as the Buddha described it, he boiled the 4 truths down to the 4 noble truths down to 2, which is what I teach is suffering and the cessation of suffering. Yeah. So it's like that is the whole underlying motivation of the Dharma as presented by the Buddha. And that is a compassionate motivation. We suffer. We know that others suffer, and we want to come to an end of that suffering. Both for ourselves and for other people. you know, especially insofar as, you know, in interpersonal relationships, sometimes, sadly, we cause each other suffering. You know, so it's just like, that's the orientation. The orientation is love and compassion. You know, so even if you're doing something like a wisdom practice or an insight practice, it's not separate from compassion. And you know, in our ultimate nature, you could say that, well, I mean, you know, it's conventionally said that wisdom and compassion are one. They're not different. So, you know, just bear that in mind. You know, it's all about compassion.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'll just outline the next area a bit, and then we'll.
Tejananda, I've got a question.
Okay.
Have you got space for that?
Sure. Yeah.
It was about the visual exercise, looking at the visual field, seeing there's no boundary. So what I experienced is something I'm very familiar with, which is that when there's a seeing of that, and then there's a pinging back, the awareness sort of pings back to some sensations around here.
Yeah.
As a kind of like checking in, no, I am still really here.
Yes.
So any thoughts about how you can work with that?
Well, I mean, you don't want to ping out of those sensations when you open your eyes. You know, what I was getting at in that last exercise yesterday is that when we open our eyes, you know, that whole cloud of sensations is still within experience, it's still within awareness. But it's like, I mean, the only way I can describe it, you know, this is very metaphorical, but it's like we are transparent. We're transparent to the space around us, you know, because literally the body is, you know, mostly invisible. So there's a sense of just being open. And that isn't disturbed by the fact that there's still these sensations going on. You know, so those two can coexist, so to speak. Does that kind of address what you're saying at all?
Not exactly. Because it feels like there's a definite move to attention going, wanting to go back. Yeah.
Well, is it like more back into the conceptualizing mind, or?
No, it's back into sensations which on some level are being identified as me.
Right, okay.
It feels like there's a reassuring going on. It's like, oh, you've just seen that, but actually it's still okay, you know.
Yeah, here. I get you, I think. Yeah, so it's like, I mean, I think this is just a dynamic that you'll notice. I mean, surely many of you have, if not all of you. You know, it's like when we kind of open out, there comes a point where it becomes a bit kind of worrying to our everyday mind, and we just ping back. Yeah. So it's just like, well, just noticing that has happened. Sort of having a sense of compassion towards, you know, the mind's, you know, from the heart, we can open to the mind with compassion. You know, the mind is kind of feeling insecure, it could be. So, you know, just noticing that, and then, you know, sort of giving it some love and opening it out again. Yeah, so, you know, that might be a way of approaching that kind of thing. But I mean, I think that is a very, very regular dynamic when we're doing insight practice.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Good. So we're going to go on to spiritual rebirth. I was thinking this morning of some ways of, you know, expressing the titles of the titles that Sangaharakshita gave to those 5 areas. Admittedly, some people find them a bit difficult, either because they're not, you know, they're not the traditional Buddhist terms, or, you know, because, well, this, that, and the other. But I was trying to think of a kind of a single word equivalent of each one, more in terms of how, you know, we're looking at it in terms of this integrated approach. And I thought, well, in a way, spiritual rebirth is realization. You know, it's when you realize something. And a realization is always followed by a sense of openness and clarity and relief and sometimes bliss. Yeah. So what's happened is that we've seen through some kind of view or delusion that we've been holding to. Yeah. And typically, largely, these are views around the self, views around our view of the self. Or, you know, it can be something much more sort of minor, but it's just like when you see through something, it's like automatically you're seeing things in a slightly different way. You know, so you may have already had some experience of this over what we've been doing over the last few days. It's like, you know, if you get a sense, oh, my body isn't as solid and heavy or isn't as bounded as I thought, or, oh, metta is actually available. You know, I don't have to go through the whole process every time. I can simply open to it. You know, so these are little realizations, and then you're seeing things in a different way. You know, so one way of talking about the spiritual rebirth aspect, it is that seeing things in a different way. We're seeing things in a fresh way, and it's free of something that we've been holding on to, which is delusive, and therefore there's some sort of dukkha that has been released, you know, because we're no longer holding on to a particular delusion. So, I mean, that's the general principle, and of course it's also embodied in practices, and as I've mentioned, particularly in the traditional order sadhanas. But what we have here is, you know, that kind of realization aspect is the spiritual rebirth. You could say that is the principle. Is when you see through something. That's the spiritual death. What is now seen, the clarity that's now here about things, is the spiritual rebirth. So it's a direct, non-conceptual knowing. You know, that's what a spiritual rebirth is. It's a direct, non-conceptual knowing. Oh, it's like this. It's not like I thought it was. It's just like this. So this can lead to a shift in our way of being, because we're no longer quite as, in a certain respect, we're not quite as limited. Now, one thing is that a spiritual death, a moment of seeing through, and its corresponding spiritual rebirth, you know, the state of being free of whatever delusion we've just seen through, it can be very, very brief. Yeah, it can be momentary. It's not that, you know, we're not talking about something which necessarily sticks around forever. In fact, the process whereby, for most people, the process whereby insight kind of develops is by increments. Yeah, there's an opening, you see something, and then it sort of seems to close down again. I mean, typically, a lot of people speak of having had experiences where the whole sense of self, or the whole sense of separation of self and other, just drops away. And then it all suddenly comes back again. Yeah. So it's like, well, what happens then? A number of things can happen. One is that you doubt whether you actually saw that, you know, because it's now gone. Another thing that people can do is you try to get back to the experience that you just had, or even, you know, I've heard some people trying to get back to an experience they had 30 years ago. And the more you try to get back to that, sadly, the more you're unlikely to open out to it again, because you're trying to get back into a memory of something, in other words, into a concept of an insight that you had, rather than opening to the fact that insight is only ever here now. Yeah. You could say that even awakening is only ever here now. We'll go into the whole thing of here now tomorrow, I think, but you know, an insight is only here now. But that means that potentially it's always here. Okay. Now, in a way, from the point of view of how I'm talking about spiritual rebirth, there's nothing we can actually do. What you have to do is engage with some kind of insight practice, and a spiritual death happens. In other words, insight happens. You see clearly something about something you've been holding on to, a delusion you've been holding on to, and that is released. It's not something that we can volitionally do. And this comes back to Sangaharakshita's metaphor of the lightning conductor, if you're familiar with that one. He was just making the point that you can't make insight happen. You could say you can't condition insight because its very nature is not conditioned. So you can't condition what is not conditioned. All you can do is look into your experience, explore your experience in line with the Dharma, what the Dharma is pointing to. And sooner or later, it's like the lightning conductor doesn't make the lightning strike. It just allows if you like, it increases the likelihood that lightning will strike. So that's what practice is about. It's about building the lightning conductor. And then, that allows, or that opens us more to the possibility of insight striking. That's the spiritual death aspect. But when the insight has struck, the spiritual rebirth aspect is there. So neither of those are something that we can volitionally do, but we can open to them through our practice. Okay, so what happens next? We have an insight. Sometimes people have quite big insights. I've known of people who've had something which is really, they actually feel that, they feel like they're enlightened. And this kind of thing can go on sometimes for hours, days, even months. And, people have very sort of blissful experiences, and, they quite possibly even stop practicing because they feel that they've reached the goal. And then suddenly, the metaphorical crap hits the fan. And, it's like you're back at square one, it seems, even worse than square one. Especially if you gave up doing any practice in the meantime. So, again, this is a familiar thing, and there's a whole book about it by Jack Cornfield called After the Ecstasy, the Laundry. So it's like insights happen, and they are genuine, but one of the things that can occur after that is that the ordinary mind, if you like, the ego mind, the grasping mind of craving and delusion, that's still there. It hasn't been sort of completely destroyed, not by any means. It's still there. All of our tendencies, all of our sanskaras are still there, and they just come back in again and grasp onto the insight as something that I possess. It becomes my insight. So in that way, we kind of we close it down and we reify it into a thing. And it stops being an insight. It just becomes, part of our ego identity. So, this is one of the ways in which we can, if you like, go off course in terms of our practice, particularly with insight practice. But it's not a bad thing if that happens, because, well, let's put it this way, it will happen. It is almost inevitable for almost everybody that those kind of misdirections or apparent misdirections can happen, and the thing is to learn from them, to notice that they're happening, or if we're lucky, others can help us see that kind of thing is happening, and then we can sort of reorientate in a way which is much more helpful. So anyway, we've got laundry to deal with, and we all have laundry. Laundry is another word for the kleshas, which I've already talked about quite a bit. So we've got basic ignorance, and then secondary to that are craving and aversion, or those are expressions of our ignorance, and then all of the other possible kleshas. This is the I suppose mythologically it's the halls of Mara. So all the kleshas are particular denizens of Mara's hold. So what do we do? Well, I mean, as I said yesterday, we're already addressing the kleshas through practicing precepts. We're addressing them through cultivating samadhi, becoming more integrated, and so forth, and through cultivating metta. So all of those ways are ways in which we're sort of working with the kleshas. But fundamentally, in the end, we have to get insight into the kleshas themselves. They won't be uprooted until we see that their very nature is also empty. So it's not just it's not just kind of form is emptiness and so on. It's like the kleshas themselves are empty. They have no ultimate substance, no ultimate existence. And this is a really, really important point, because if the kleshas, if these afflictions were not empty, they would be inherent to our nature. In other words, we couldn't go beyond them. There would always be kleshas. But it's very clear that the Buddha is teaching that we can go beyond the kleshas. They can sort of they can die out, they can die away, with a little bit of help from seeing through their very nature. So this is one way in which we can address the laundry. We can go into the kleshas and really have a jolly good look at them and see what's going on there. Now, probably we've been doing this already in many different ways, but I'm just going to suggest one or two ways of doing that via insight practice. And we'll do that, but we'll have a break first. So we've got until 7 minutes past 12 by my clock. So see you here in 7 minutes. So why do we klesh? Why do we do the kleshas? We do it fundamentally because we think it will make us happy or secure. And the reason why we have this sense of insecurity, well, I mean, one reason is that actually things are pretty insecure. So it's like we can't depend on reality to maintain our being. We can't depend on reality to sort of sustain us. And this is all too obvious at the moment to many more people in the world than perhaps it usually is. But this is something that has been pointed to in Buddhism right from the very beginning. The Buddha was pointing to the three marks, impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and insubstantiality. This is an orientation that we have to take on in order to see how we're, in a sense, how we're mistaking reality. Because of our fundamentally because of our view of ourselves as separate, it's almost like there's an existential hole that we feel that we have to fill, because we don't feel fulfilled, we don't feel whole. And for that reason, we try and bring things in to our being, and also keep things out if they seem to be threatening. And that's the fundamental dynamic, of course, of craving a diversion. But the Buddha was pointing to three underlying views there, which is that potentially things could be permanent, they could be safe, they could be secure. They could be, we could have some sort of substantiality, some sort of, if you like, permanent reality to our being, and that ultimately things could be satisfactory. These are the delusions that the Lakshanas are actually enabling us to look into. So we use impermanence as a counteractive to our belief that things could be permanent and stable. And so forth with the other ones. So again, the kleshas themselves are well intentioned. It's like they wish, just to personalize them in a way, they wish for our well-being, but because they're led by delusion, they kind of inevitably lead to the opposite. So that's why the kleshas are objects for compassion rather than something that we need to sort of aspects of ourselves that we need to sort of blast out of the water. First of all, we can have compassion towards these deluded tendencies in ourselves and other people, and then we can sort of work to see through them and see that by nature, well, actually they're unnecessary. We don't need to do craving, we don't need to do aversion, and we don't need to ignore. Anyway, I promised that we'd do some practice, but just before we go on to do that, any questions about what I've said so far, both before and after the break? Okay.
Sorry, I was struggling to find the unmute button. First of all, I just really like to celebrate the what you said just before the break about the kind of the lightning strikes of insight and how insight is transient, and I thought that was such an important point that I really appreciated you saying that so clearly. And then just now, again, just appreciating this, describing the kleshas as requiring compassion. I just makes me well up with gratitude. So thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, well, the kleshas just want to be loved, really.
Indeed.
Yeah. So we're going to love them now. We're going to love them to death. Spiritual death. Okay, any other points or questions, or shall we get to the point? Right, well, I'm going to just take us through a couple of ways of addressing the laundry aspect. So the laundry, for me, the laundry aspect, that's what I call it. The laundry aspect is very much part of spiritual rebirth. So whenever there's a spiritual rebirth, there comes a point where, well, I mean, you could say that the insight is a bit of a depth charge. It opens out aspects of our being which we haven't been conscious of before. And it's a familiar trope in Triratna. Some things coming up. I've had things coming up. Well, things do come up. Things that we've been holding. Usually, things that we've been holding in the body, in the soma, in contractions in the body. So we might suddenly find that we're getting angry when we weren't getting angry before. Or we just can't leave those cakes alone, the cakes that Bajra was referring to at the beginning, that we can't actually go out and buy at the moment. So, but it's like you just spend your whole time thinking about when cake is available, that kind of thing. Anyway, I won't draw on that too much, but yeah, so we just notice certain things coming up, and when they do, they're going to be kleshas. They're going to be one of those. So we can actually kind of preemptively look into the very nature of kleshas and see literally what they're made of. Yeah. Now, kleshas manifest as sanskaras. Sanskaras are habit patterns, basically. Yeah. So we've got habit patterns whereby we engage with life with in respect of the kleshas, or a sort of klesha way of acting, engaging with craving, aversion, jealousy, pride, whatever it may be. So we can take a practice which is called bringing the kleshas to the path. Yeah, and this one is quite, in a sense, if you're used to the notion that if a klesha happens, you have to just admit it, or counteract it, or confess it, and none of that is being denied. All of that applies to our practice as well. But at this point, we're going to see how we can bring the kleshas to the path, and this is a way of seeing the emptiness of the kleshas. So a sanskara is literally something which we make up. That's more or less as I understand it, the etymology of the words. Sam means sort of bringing together. Kara means making. So we bring stuff together and make something of it. And what we make of it is what we call a negative emotion, just to use that generic term. So we create negative emotions. As I said before, negative emotions are not intrinsic to our being. They're something which we develop, and for that reason, we can also see what they're made of, and, so to speak, undevelop them, or see through them, see that they have no substantial existence. So the practice is what I don't take this literally, but I call it the klesha bhavana. So the cultivation, the deliberate cultivation of negative emotion. And that's what we're going to do. What that means is that, well, what I suggest is that you take a tendency in the craving or the aversion direction, which is not overpoweringly strong at the moment. Yeah, the one in the aversion direction, the one that I usually recommend, is irritation. Yeah, is there anything, or more likely anybody, who you find irritating? Now, maybe under the present circumstances, we've got plenty of opportunity. We won't just be irritated that we can't just go out and do what we like, for instance. And dare I say, if we're with other people, I'm with 5 other people. Steve's there, he's one of them. You can get, hi Steve, we can get irritated with other people, and so we're in a kind of a very useful sort of experimental situation at the moment, just to see how we can respond. So just allow that irritation is there. Think of something that you can easily get irritated about, and it's a question of kind of working it up a bit. Actually, you have full permission to engage in prapancha. This is a once only chance, so take the opportunity if you will, with both hands, and get irritated. The other one is, of course, craving, something that you desire. Yeah, so whatever it may be, if there's something you would really, really like, particularly perhaps something that you haven't got at the moment, that might be a good direction to go in. So it could be either, but you need to choose one of them. In the traditional system, you'll do this for all 5 kleshas, as a practice. Yeah, so you might start with craving, then aversion, then pride, then jealousy, and then ignorance. Yeah, so, or ignorance in the form of ignoring, deliberately ignoring. But we'll just take either craving or aversion, in the form of irritation or desire. Okay. If you find that it's getting a bit kind of, if you feel your head's about to explode, or you're about to sort of go into a rampage, come back into the soma, come back into the heart, come back into the metta. Okay. But this will only work if you actually get a real sense of this negative emotion. So are you up for it? Good. Okay, so we'll just close your eyes. Just sit for a little while, just get a sense of your soma and being. And bear in mind that our objective in doing this is fundamentally compassion. So we're not about to cultivate a closure in order to become more embedded in it, but to actually see through it and see through or give an end to the dukkha that it gives rise to. Okay, now just decide on your direction. Is it going to be towards desire, or is it going to be towards aversion, irritation, and start up the prapancha. So you need to be willing just to, you probably go somewhere where you don't want to go at the moment. So let it develop. And as you do so, as you are thinking and imagining around it, notice what's going on in the soma in relation to it. So there'll come a point when it's going, it's up and running. And at that point, bring your awareness strongly and immediately into the body sensations alone. And just resist any tendency to go back into the prapancha. Just be in those body sensations. Feel them. They're probably quite unpleasant, but just remain with them. Are those sensations craving? Do they crave? Or if it was aversion, are they irritated? Are the sensations irritated? So again, if the prapancha starts up, just back very strongly into those sensations. Do the sensations crave, or do the sensations feel ill will? Keep with them. And as long as you don't get back into mental proliferation, notice what happens with the sensations that were very much part of that emotion. Okay, so any observations, or would anyone like to describe what they found by doing that?
Yeah, I would actually, Tejananda.
Sure.
'Cause it was so kind of clear, really clear that, I mean, you know, to focus on, well, I focused on the irritation.
Yeah.
And just immediately felt contracted, you know, in the body, in the heart sense. But it was just, it was really, I was very surprised at how immediate that was. And just to keep the focus on that was really quite unpleasant. And then there was quite a strong, just feeling of sadness, actually. I mean, I could quite easily not go into the thinking around it, which I think is just because of doing more practice at the moment. But, so that was really interesting, you know, just to see, observe how quickly that can happen. Yeah,
it's quite salutary, isn't it?
Yeah.
At the same time, you know, seeing that it's like it can equally unhappen. So, you know, which is, you know, the main point of the exercise is to see how, you know, a klesha which has happened. I mean, obviously in everyday life, you know, this also applies. We're doing work here in sort of a meditation practice, which applies to everyday life, you know, so that when, you know, say when anger rises up, you can sort of see immediately that it can be, it can unarise, so to speak.
Well, I think the sadness was the compassion aspect.
Right.
Actually, it felt like, that was, in a way, there was relief in that, because there was a contraction. I could still feel it in my body, that tightening. But the sadness was, oh yeah, okay. There's that was the compassion aspect. And it didn't feel directed. I don't know. It just felt compassion arose.
Yeah, that's great.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Yes, I'd like to say something.
Sure.
I was working with craving, and I almost immediately felt a tension which was in the whole of my body.
Wow.
And a feeling of like, real tension. And when I looked at that, actually I wanted to cry. I really wanted to cry, and it felt like that's what I was holding back.
Yeah.
And yes, it was very unpleasant. And I then I took a very deep breath. I had to take a very deep breath in order to actually release the tension. And then it's sort of all calmed down.
Yeah.
I'm finding that very revealing.
Right. What revealing what exactly?
That the craving is actually hiding this feeling of I need to let go of something, so I'm using this in order to let go.
Yeah.
So the craving allows me to let go. When actually, probably sometimes actually to cry would actually be a really, really compassionate thing to do.
Sure. Yeah. Great. Thank you. Any others?
I had something, Tejananda. Yeah. Echoing what the others have said with the unpleasantness of it, I felt my whole body went into a kind of cringe with irritation.
Yeah.
And that got stronger and stronger. And it felt like it was a big wave coming in, tide coming in. And then there was the crest of the wave, and then it crashed. And then all the tension just went.
Yeah.
And it was so clear that of the insubstantiality of it somehow. And the relief of that. Yeah.
What made you see the insubstantiality?
That it could just dissolve, that there wasn't, all this tension, which was so strong and unpleasant, could just go somehow.
Yeah, indeed. Well, that is, that's what it's getting at. It's just like, well, I mean, two things. One is that by doing what we've developed so far in terms of integration, positive motion, spiritual death, we're in quite a sensitive state. And being sensitive is really important to this approach. Because when we are sensitive, we can notice just how unpleasant the closures are. Which sometimes, when we're caught up in, say, like anger or desire, it kind of feels good at the time. But by doing it in this way, we, if you like, we're seeing its true nature much more clearly. It doesn't feel good. It can feel quite horrible. At the same time, by sort of cutting back into just the body sensations, we're effectively breaking up the samskara. The two bits that come together are the prapancha bit, the mind bit, and the soma bit. When they come together, we have a full-blown emotion. And I mean, as everybody knows, those kind of full-blown emotions can they can just happen in a moment, especially anger. It's just like somebody says somebody, or when you're driving, somebody cuts in on you, and woof, there it is. Yeah, so it happens very, very quickly. But the important thing here is, well, we can't necessarily stop that happening under those circumstances, but it's quite possible to cut through it right there. You can just see its nature. You're not kind of repressing anything. You're not going into any sort of denial about it. It's just like you're seeing its nature directly as empty of being a negative emotion. Yeah, and in that way, it just sort of dissolves very, very rapidly. What you're left with, well, I mean, did anyone notice what you were left with? If you found that the actual glacier dissolved?
Can I say?
Yeah.
Because I went straight back into the lying down position, back onto my cloud. So then when I was doing the mental proliferation, it was like stirring up all this energy. And then when we stopped, it was like an immediate kind of, could feel the tension in my head. But then it was like all the silt coming back down very slowly, back down into the cloud.
Yeah.
And it was, it was just that, the relief, I think. I can't remember what the question was you asked now. Sorry.
Well, just what did you notice about the sensations once it ceased to be a glacier? What happened with the sensations, which were a few moments ago very much part of that negative emotion?
Yeah, they just went back down into the soma cloud experience.
Yeah, well, exactly. So that's what happens. And I believe I read recently that something like it's just like, unless we give attention to an area of experience, like a sensation, a kind of sensation, it will just dissolve within about 4 seconds. So it's like we maintain that sense of the glacier by this feedback loop between the somatic aspect and the mental aspect. But when we cut out of the mental aspect and just come into the somatic aspect, it's no longer what it was. Almost immediately, it's no longer what it was. And the sensations just become body sensations, albeit probably unpleasant ones. But even that, after a little while, it just becomes it settles down into what it was before. So any other observations?
I was noticing something that so I noticed the body sensations just dying away as soon as I stopped the puncture. But what I also noticed was that developing the glacier left my mind feeling toxic. So that didn't die away so quickly. The sensations died away quite quickly, but I can still feel some of the toxicity of having kind of gone into the glaciers like that. Yeah. But it is interesting that being in the glaciers does produce this toxic effect on the mind. On the mind sense. Yeah.
Well, exactly. Yeah, that's another thing that Sangaharakshita has spoken about. I think there was some weird experiment that somebody did that showed that the glaciers are literally poisonous. Back in there about 50 years ago. Right. But I mean, literally or metaphorically, well, that's why we call them the poisons, of course. Yeah. So that feeling of toxicity is well, that's what they are. Yeah.
It's quite tangible. It's almost like a slight nausea or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, I think that's another benefit of this kind of practice, is that it's like you do see quite directly that they're not what they're representing themselves to be. They are delusive. And in that way, if you can see how toxic and unpleasant they are, well, that in itself is a motivation to continue to see through them. Anybody else? Hello?
Hello.
Oh.
Same screen, different person.
Yes.
Yeah, what I'm left with at the end of it. So my thing was being irritated by people in the park not respecting the 2 meter distance thing. And after the sort of just the sensations dissolving and seeing them as, you know, just sensations, what I'm actually left with is a sense of, I don't need to do that. And a kind of sense of knowing and a sense of resolve.
Yeah.
And yeah, so there's kind of a connect. I suppose it's kind of like Shraddha. It feels like quite connected to something a bit deeper in my heart. And so I wonder if that's one of those moments where faith arises out of dukkha.
Well, I definitely think so. Yeah, sounds like it. Yeah, yeah. I mean, in a sense, that also would be a sign that you're doing this kind of practice in the right way. You know, because if it gives rise to, if it gives rise to further klesha, then it's not a practice you should be doing at all at that time. But if it gives rise to a sense of shraddha, then you know, clearly, you know, you've seen something, but you know, it's increased your confidence in the Dharma. Yeah, and that is really, really valuable, of course.
Can I say something, Tejananda?
Of course.
It's Kamajoti. I just had a slightly different experience. I focused on irritation and just trying to, you know, cultivate the irritation, allow the papancha to happen. It just seemed so ridiculous. I just burst out laughing, and I had just had this sense of, wow, this is ridiculous. This is what I'm doing all the time, you know, telling these stories. So I found that, just very interesting. Oh yeah, it is ridiculous. I don't have to do it. So.
Great. Yeah, I mean, absolutely right on there as well. You know, so you didn't even need, in a way, to engage with the rest of the practice.
No, it was, well, I couldn't. I kept trying to, you know, come back to it, but it was just so ridiculous that I just kept laughing, and it was great.
Yeah, when you get to that point, you do see it that way. It's just like, why would anyone want to do that?
Yes, why would I want to do that? And yet I do. You know, so, yeah.
So yeah, it's an important staging point.
Yes. Thank you.
Tejananda, can I ask something? I really enjoyed like kind of coming out of my mental stories into the body. It felt like a kind of relief from the klesha, but I felt like I kind of put it on pause rather than like saw through it. Like I think it still has power. I think it will come up again. I just wondered if in your experience, like continuing to kind of come back to the body from it, you know, can eventually lead to insight, or if there are other ways that you would work with something with a little bit more power.
I would, I mean, I would, you obviously use all the other means at your disposal to work with kleshas, you know, from the point of view of ethics and samadhi. But you know, with regard to this, I mean, you know, this is one method that you can use. And no, it doesn't work. I mean, it's like you see through that particular klesha, but if you like, the samskara under it hasn't died out. It hasn't died away. So it will continue to come up. But the more you can get insight into a particular kind of klesha that you have a tendency towards, the less and less strong it will become, until eventually it just sort of dies away. But you know, that can take, well, it takes as long as it takes.
Thank you. Yeah, I've just I've started a type of therapy that works very somatically to kind of dialogue with these different parts. And I just find it quite interesting, the connection between what you're saying and that approach as well. Thank you.
Good. Okay.
I was just going to say,
yeah.
Can you hear? Sorry, my bandwidth's suddenly gone a bit funny. I was on a retreat recently. I'll turn my video off and see if that helps.
Yeah.
I was on a retreat. It's Satchalila. I was on a retreat recently, and we were exploring reaction practice, which seems very, very much the same territory.
Yeah.
Like
Is this Subhuti's
with
approach?
Cultivating a reaction and then really sitting with somatic sense of it.
Okay, yeah.
And I just was struck. Some people on the retreat were actually meeting at home, really, like every week, and doing this practice very much like an alternative alongside confession practice. And I just felt it's quite helpful to recognise that, you know, we are using reactions as a catalyst, and also that, yeah, like you say, we can actually make a practice of doing it regularly.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting idea. Yeah, I mean, actually doing it with other people, so that, you know, in a way, you can just get feedback, or you know, just sort of express what's going on for you, and you get feedback from other people, and seeing what's going on with them in a similar sort of way. Yeah, I've heard of that reaction practice, so I gather it is pretty similar.
Yeah, Subhadramati was saying when they do it, there are often gales of laughter. A bit like Pema Jyoti was saying, I think you sort of you really see the ridiculous. Oh, what? I don't need to do that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Thank you.
Tejananda, I have another question. So recently I've been doing a lot of what I think of as spiritual rebirth practice in terms of imagining Tara and sort of feeling into directly imagining the heart mind, the awakened heart mind, and what the response would be. Yeah. So it's a little bit like rather than, you know, spiritual death then goes to spiritual rebirth. It's sort of working from the spiritual rebirth end. And I suppose I haven't really heard people talk about that. So it feels to me like it must have an effect in a cumulative way, like you were talking about.
Yeah.
You know, you keep imagining it, and because it's our true nature, we can imagine it.
Yeah.
And we can feel it in the body, imagine it in the body, and then feel it in the body.
Yeah.
So I suppose I've got a certain amount of Shraddha, but it feels quite new, and so I just wonder what you think of that approach, whether you've experienced that or heard of others who found that approach helpful.
Well, yeah, in various ways. I mean, it is one of the ways, as you're saying, in which you can work with sadhana, and you know, with a deity, you know, Buddha or Bodhisattva, and yeah, I mean, I think definitely it works that way, and it is using the imagination, but in a very, very helpful way. Yeah, so it's like you can work from that perspective. I think any of the methods where you, in a sense, you just are opening directly to reality as here. You know, and it can be done via a Buddha or a Bodhisattva, or it can just be done in terms of, you know, well, we might be kind of touching on this tomorrow in the sense of just opening to awareness or awakeness as already being here. Yeah. So, you know, I mean, I would definitely, I mean, obviously I'm not talking a great deal about sadhana because not everybody does one, but, you know, definitely I think anybody, you know, if you have a strong feeling of relationship with a particular Buddha or Bodhisattva figure, you can actually, well, try working in that way and, you know, see what effect it has. But it'd be interesting to see how it goes.
Yeah, I mean, it's not really different from the connecting with awareness, actually. It's kind of imagining, feeling into the quality of the awareness and how that will feel in the body, essentially.
Yeah, well, I mean, to some extent or other, I mean, again, we'll probably go a bit more into this tomorrow, but to some extent or other, whenever you're, even if you're simply opening to awareness, you are using the imagination. It may not always be clear that you are actually using it, but it's like the imagination is a very, very helpful support. And at some point, it just sort of you could say the imagination itself self-liberates. It just goes, and you're left with, if you like, the reality of the situation.
Thank you.
Okay, we've only got 10 minutes left. I'm just going to, if there are any further questions that come out of this, as Badra said, we will have an opportunity for any other random questions towards the end of tomorrow's session. There is one more practice I'd like to do, but just one thing, just to notify you or sort of flag up that, of course, like the other recordings, this one will go up on the internet. And I wonder if anybody who said something in relation to this exercise that we've just done would have any reservations about that going, being seen by other Buddhists. Yep. That's good, because I think it's really useful to, for this to go out there. So thank you. Okay, well, I just want to do one more short practice with you. This is another approach to the kleshas. I've got the idea from Reggie Ray, and so I'm going to use the title that he uses, which is sitting with our own shit. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're simply going to sit. We're going to sit for 5 minutes without moving, at least without volitionally moving. Yeah, and this is quite interesting. I mean, in a way, this is a traditional approach to just sitting. You sit completely motionlessly. I must admit, personally, I do have a tendency to scratch sometimes, but it's like when itches and so forth come up, we can use movement, especially scratching or relieving the discomfort, as a way of not experiencing what's going on. Yeah, so if we just allow whatever comes up for 5 minutes to just come up without moving, without trying to get out of it, it can help us sort of down-regulate from any sort of klesha which may emerge. So let's just try this and see what happens. Okay. So just go straight into just sitting. And by the way, do this if you want to. If you don't, you don't have to. But it can be quite interesting, especially if you don't regularly meditate in that way. So whatever's happening, just let it be. Let it be what it is. Whatever impulses to move or do anything about the situation, whatever arises, just resist them. Okay, so the thing I was desperate to do was to adjust my glasses, but any observations on what happened sitting absolutely still?
I can say something.
I wasn't sitting. Sorry, go on.
Could be
Sorry,
at the same time.
I'm not sure who's talking now. Catherine?
Hello.
Hi.
I've lost my thread now. I had a sense of, it was more of a generalized sense of what I could call a restlessness or an irritation. It was like my whole being was quivering, and then I just noticed that actually I didn't need to call it restlessness. I could just somehow relax with it, and it was more like just the way it all is that everything is always moving. Like
yeah, very interesting.
Very somatic.
Yeah. So that that insight that you don't need to call it anything. That's a very very interesting one. It does make a tangible difference to the experience, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
Great. Okay, thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, Tejananda and everybody. I was noticing the effect that mental movements have on the body. So the body was fairly still, well, pretty still, but if mentally I had an idea of relax in my face, then my face would move. There'd be a relaxation. Similarly, other ideas or thoughts might go through of a more klesha kind of nature, and there'd be tension. So that it was very clear, the sort of correspondence between the two. A sort of non-volitional, if you like, sort of movement of the body that responds to mental movements.
Yeah, that's a good seeing. Yeah.
I normally am. Oh, hang on.
It's all right. You're on.
Well, I am on. Sorry. I normally am pretty still when I do just an ordinary sitting practice.
Yeah.
But sort of being aware of being still in a very conscious way felt very different. And two things that happened was, one, physically, I found that without realizing it, my body was tilting forwards more and more. I couldn't detect any movement. I just noticed that it was different.
Yeah.
And at the same time, my mind was buzzing with all kinds of distractions and things. So I think in normal practice, I am actually maintaining my posture without thinking about it or something.
Yeah.
I must be maintaining an upright posture in some sort of active way.
Yeah. Well, it's worth just reflecting a bit on what was going on there. Because if you normally sit really without moving, what made the difference? I'll leave that with you.
Yes, I don't know, but it's very interesting. Yeah. I don't have any grip on it at the moment.
Okay. Something might come to you overnight,
Yeah.
One more maybe? Or are we done?
I was just sitting and realizing or thinking there was nothing there, and then my awareness was like, well, there needs to be something there, so then I put something there. You know what I mean? Because it was, so I sat there and I was thinking nothing's happening, so then my mind overtook and thought, well, there should be something going on, and then the prapancha started. So that was quite interesting.
Yeah. Good. Well, I think we need to bring it to a close for now. So homework, try doing that again, during one of your meditations. I mean, 5 minutes is probably doable for anybody. You could challenge yourself to 10 minutes or longer, and just see what effect that has, just literally sitting with whatever comes up without resisting it, and you're just letting it arise without giving way to impulses to kind of cover it up by moving or scratching or whatever, or even actually thinking. That might be going too far, but anyway, there you are. There's something that you can play with overnight if you want to. Okay.
Thanks very much. Yeah. Tejananda, as ever, fantastic, and certainly seems quite challenging material to engage with. So great to be set some homework, but thank you very much, and we'll see you all tomorrow. And as I've done previously, if you please remember the donations. That's so important. And thanks very much, Tejananda. And yes, we'll have a slightly longer session tomorrow. So look forward to seeing you all then.
Bhadra?
Yes.
Sorry, could I add something that normally Tejananda would come to Bristol completely for free because he's supported by Vajraloka, because they run retreats all year round, but they're not able to run retreats at the moment. And it might be worth thinking about that as well in terms of donating something to Vajraloka. That's just my thoughts.
I'll leave that to you. I'm not asking for anything.
Vajraloka.co.uk.
Thanks, Pamadristi. Okay, see you all tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.